Number 1. My home. I live in a pretty affluent neighborhood due to getting a decent inheritance from my parents. I got their house and money, which would have been more than enough for me to live on. But even though I didn't make a lot of money working as an adjunct professor at a nearby community college, I enjoyed the work. So even though I didn't need to work, I continued to do so. I mention this because I was a bit out of place in this neighborhood. I was also unmarried and I didn't have any kids. Along with that, I worked a job where I had to sometimes deal with some unruly and immature children. All these things together made it possible that if someone were to try and do something to me, it could have been a number of people. Well, except a jealous boyfriend who caught me with his girlfriend because nothing that interesting had or would ever happen in my life. I had gotten home from work one day around dusk. It was really my favorite day of the week because I didn't have any night classes to teach. The sun was almost all the way down when I arrived home, but not quite. It was going to be trash day the following morning, so I went into the garage to get the cans ready to take out onto the street. When I brought the cans outside, I noticed someone walking on the other side of the street. I didn't know my neighbors well, as I mentioned, so I didn't know who it was. However, while I was taking the garbage out, I began having this really weird feeling. I'm sure everyone reading this has had it before. You feel like someone is looking at you, even though you have no reason to really think that they are. But the feeling was strong, and it caused me to look up. The guy, who I had seen walking across the street, was walking very slowly, and I noticed him looking over at me. However, as soon as I looked at him, he looked away really quickly. And afterward, he began walking faster down the street. I really didn't think too much about it, as that sort of thing happens all the time. I finished placing the garbage and recycling cans in their places, and then I went back into the house. I remember fixing myself a drink. If you've ever been a community college teacher, you would know why. Sometimes when you're grading papers, the only thing that doesn't keep you from fearing for the future of humanity is having a drink while you're grading. Oh, and by the way, I taught English 101 and 102. So that might give you a bit of an idea of what I had to deal with. After about an hour of grading papers, I got up to go and prepare something for dinner. When I was coming back to my seat in the front room, I looked out the front window. There was a street lamp right across the street from my house. I noticed what seemed like a figure standing in the shadows. They were just to the side of the direct light. I had to squint a little bit to try and see if someone was actually there, though. When I did, I could have sworn that I had seen some movement away from the light. I thought about the guy that I had seen earlier that had been looking at me. Now I just got mildly concerned, but I wasn't thinking that there was someone out there targeting or even aware of me in any way. I immediately began thinking that maybe there was someone out there that was planning on breaking into one of my neighbors' houses. But it was merely a passing thought at first. Sometimes I could absolutely let my imagination run away with me, so I didn't concern myself too much. I had some dinner and continued grading papers. I didn't see anything else strange the few times that I had gotten up, but I did keep looking out the window, checking to see if the figure I had seen was still out there. There was one time when I thought that I might have seen someone, but I wasn't completely sure. By the time I ended up going to bed that night, I had all but forgotten about seeing the figure outside. My imagination often got the better of me, as I just mentioned, probably because I did a lot of creative writing. I woke up in the middle of the night, breathless and completely unaware of what was going on. All I knew was that I woke up in shock in bed and I couldn't breathe for some reason. But after my head cleared up a little bit, I realized that someone was in my room. He had his hands over my nose and mouth and was trying to smother me. I bucked and struggled, but you have to know it is hard when you can't breathe. I went into full panic mode. Something occurred to me, though. If he was trying to kill me, I should just act like I was dead. And so I went limp and rolled my eyes and held my chest still, not breathing, but not struggling anymore either. I pretended to be dead. He still held his hand over my face for a few more seconds, but after that he removed them. I did my best not to breathe and to make him think that I was dead. He stood up straight for a moment, looking at me. Then he turned and walked out the door without even checking my pulse. I was shocked that he did that, but then I began to take little short breaths until I was sure he was away, and then I pulled in the freaking air. I was scared, but I got up. I was still hurting from the smothering, but I was determined to get the guy. I was too weak, however, and he got out of the house and got away before I could catch him. So instead of following him, I called 911. I can't think of why anyone would try to kill me. To this day, I don't know who he was or why he was trying to do it. Fortunately, I never had any other attempts on my life, but that also keeps me from having any idea why this happened. Number 2. Home Alone. When I was about 14 years old, my parents began letting me stay home by myself. At first it was only times when they would go out to eat or something of that sort. It was nice to have a few hours in the house to myself, but when I proved to them that I was able to stay home alone without any problems, these times definitely increased over time. When I was 15 years old, I actually got to stay home by myself over a 4-day weekend. My parents wanted to go on a holiday cruise. They didn't plan on going without me, though. I just had no interest in going. I wouldn't tell them this for years afterwards, but being on a huge ship like that, out in the middle of the ocean, was pretty damn scary to me. Plus, it would be nice to have the house to myself for a whole 4 days. 2 days had been the longest at that point that I'd ever been by myself. I had the best plans for the time I was home by myself. I was going to eat myself a ton of pizza, and I was going to play myself a ton of video games, and that was about it. It was going to end up being the perfect weekend. They left on Friday morning, and I did have school that day. I got out of school, and although normally my mom would pick me up and drive me home, I had no problem walking home that day. There weren't many kids from the school who walked, so I was pretty much by myself on the way home. It was about a 30-minute walk through town, and then through my neighborhood to get home. My mom was a homemaker, so this was one of the few times when I got home that I found the house completely empty. It was a really weird experience, and I have to admit to feeling a little strange at first. My dad was a doctor, and we lived in a really nice and big house, and being alone in such a place was always a different experience. That night, I did exactly what I had planned on doing. I ordered pizza, got myself some soda, and don't tell my parents, but I nicked some drinks out of the liquor cabinet, and I just settled in and played some video games until I fell asleep in my room. I didn't turn on any of the lights in the house either. Whenever I had to walk around to get something to drink or otherwise, I just walked around in the dark. I could see where I was going because of the outside lights shining in the downstairs windows. Plus, I was playing horror games, and those are best to play when you keep the house nice and dark. I was wearing my headphones as I was playing the games too. If you play horror games, you know they are a lot more fun with headphones. You can hear the sounds that might be warning you of an upcoming terror approaching you from behind or around a corner. It just made the whole situation a lot scarier than it had to be, but that's why we enjoy it. I kept my headset on as I was walking throughout the house, since they were wireless. A few times I went and grabbed myself another drink. I didn't worry about my parents finding out about that, since they drank enough that I doubt they ever paid attention to how much was missing from their cabinet. I wasn't used to drinking, and I didn't want to get myself really drunk, so I only nipped a little bit each time that I came out. I got up to go and get myself another drink. As I was walking back towards the steps, I had the strangest feeling. I don't know how to describe it really, but it was a feeling that I wasn't alone. I hadn't gotten such a feeling before, and I really didn't care for it. Going up on the stairs, I was pretty nervous, but I really didn't know why, other than the strange feeling. I didn't see anything, so I decided that it was nothing but an odd feeling. It must have come out of nowhere. When I got to the top of the stairs, I don't know why I did it, but I turned to look down the stairs. When I did, I found myself looking at a really big man standing there. Someone had broken into the house, which they may have thought was deserted because I had the lights off all the time. But he saw me looking at him, and that's when things got scary. The man started up the stairs after me. I ran as fast as I could, trying to get into my bedroom. I was able to get in there and get the door closed. I locked it and immediately heard him pounding on the door. I ran to get my phone. The door was not going to hold for very long. Well, in fact, if the guy had any sense, he could have unlocked it from the outside. It was one of those kind of doorknobs. But it didn't matter, and I called 911. The response was immediate. There must have been a police car close by, because I heard the sirens really quickly, and I guess the guy heard them too because he stopped pounding on the door. I heard him also running away from the door. I didn't know what to do, but I went to look out the window. My window faced the backyard, and that is the way the intruder tried to get out. I watched as he jumped the fence. The cops caught up to the guy pretty quickly and arrested him. They brought him to the house so I could identify him as the man I saw. Even though it had been dark, I knew it was him. And he looked straight at me with his cold eyes, and I felt terrified. But the guy went to jail. I was happy about that. What I wasn't happy about were the memories of what happened. I was walking around the house with my headphones on, and the man was in the house while I was doing this. I wondered how much was going on in the house that I hadn't noticed. I wondered how long he had been there, with me, totally unaware, and how long I had been in danger without knowing it. Number 3. The park. During the big economics boom in Japan, there were many theme and amusement parks that opened up. Unfortunately, the competition between them and then the following economic recession caused many of them to close down. Very few opened back up, and those that didn't remain open for very long. While this was unfortunate for businesses and the theme park industry, it has left some really interesting abandoned places in Japan. Exploring an old and empty house is one thing, but exploring an entire park where you are the only person there is something that is on a whole different level. The really major parks, despite what many people might want you to think, have been demolished by the time I went exploring. So most of the ones that I had been to were really smaller parks that no one would have ever heard of. That might be another reason why they all closed down, because no one had ever heard of them before. There is definitely a pretty high creep factor in being in these places, and I will have to admit, the places can play tricks with your mind that you couldn't believe. You consistently feel like you are being watched. You are always thinking that you might be seeing something that really isn't there. But that is what the worst part is. If you see something, how can you ever really be sure that it wasn't really there? That is the huge appeal of going to these places. You get to freak yourself out pretty bad, while remaining relatively safe. I've had my share of freakouts like that, but those are all different stories. This happened at the third abandoned theme park that I decided to go and explore. This was a pretty old one, and I couldn't understand why they hadn't torn it down yet. I was taking a risk with the time that I spent looking for it, honestly. I almost thought it was gone before I actually found it. At the entrance to the park, I noticed something weird. There was a board that had nails in it, with the point of the nails sticking upwards. It was like the owners of the park wanted a cheap way to keep people out of the park. It was easily detectable and I stepped over it. However, when I began walking, I tripped, and what I later noticed was a tripwire. I fell on my face. I had to admit that was pretty clever. The park didn't disappoint. I know that it had some rides, but not a whole ton of them. But there were tons of booths that probably sold food, merchandise, and had games to play. Everything was run down, rusted, crusty, and wonderfully spooky. It didn't take long for the creep factor to really set in, and that feeling of being watched came over me pretty quickly. In fact, I began to get pretty paranoid pretty quickly over the whole thing. It was all normal, though. In fact, when I was walking, and I was sure that I saw someone out of the corner of my eye on a merry-go-round, I turned and looked to see if anyone was really there. And when I did, I didn't see anyone there at all. I didn't think much about it, other than how I felt normally in these situations, but I was enjoying the creepy feeling as I was walking around. Since I had seen someone by the merry-go-round, I decided to go over and to check it out. It was really run down, and the riding animals were decayed and ugly looking. But I also noticed something that was really unusual. The riding animals had barbed wire wrapped around them. It was obviously wrapping, so no one would be stupid enough to get on the ride and hurt themselves. But it just seemed really weird to me that anyone would wrap them like that. As I walked around the park, I noticed a lot of weird things like that. There were things wrapped up in barbed wire. I came across an area where there was another tripwire. Luckily this time I was ready for it, and I didn't trip. But all this just made me start to wonder if someone had been there before and had been setting up booby traps. There was one roller coaster in the park, and it wasn't that huge of a coaster. There was still a train on the tracks, and it was trapped too. But it was a bit more subtle, with razor wires wrapped on the drop-down harness. It was odd, and I couldn't figure it out. I heard some footsteps quickly running behind me. When I turned around, I could have sworn I saw someone dash behind one of the booths. I felt my anxiety go up when I saw that, wondering if my imagination was getting the better of me yet. I cautiously approached the booth that I think I saw the person run behind. I was really nervous looking around it, expecting someone to show up and attack me. When I walked around to the back, I didn't see anyone there. I was really getting nervous. I mean, that was the whole point. I wanted to be freaked out, but when the freaking out actually happens, it gets a little weird. In the moment you wonder what is going on, and you wonder why you put yourself in this position to be scared. That was when I noticed something else. There was a cigarette on the ground, and it was still burning a little. My heart jumped in my chest when I saw that, because that indicated that I was not alone in the park, and the things that I was seeing were real. And then I heard a noise. It was a human scream, but it wasn't a painful scream. It was something else altogether. The kind of scream that sounded like it wanted to attack, rather than it was being attacked. I turned toward the sound and I saw another person. This person was hiding behind the train of the roller coaster. He was standing right where I had been standing before, and it made me wonder if he was there the entire time. He didn't run away. but he crouched down behind the car of the train, so only his eyes were above it and looking at me, and the look that he was giving me was not something I or anyone else would really want to see. It was a scary look. It was a look that told me I was not welcome in that park. I heard a noise off to the other side of me. It was a similar scream, and when I looked over I saw another person. Both were male, and both were very young. They were both shirtless, with strange tattoos covering their torsos, and they were wearing cargo shorts. But what got me was the looks in their eyes. I decided that I had to leave. I was scared, though, that even if I moved, they might come after me. But all they were doing was looking at me, and my eyes met theirs each time. I knew that these were not the only two people in the park. I started walking quickly toward the entrance. I kept looking back over my shoulder to see if the boys were still there. However, they hid themselves again. One of them let out that horrible scream again. It cut into my soul and terrified me. Like an idiot, I forgot about the tripwire at the entrance and I tripped on it. As I was falling, I put my hands out to break my fall and my left hand landed on the board with the nails, puncturing the palm of my hand. Fortunately, it was not too deep and I was able to pull it out. I got out of the park and got as far away from it as I could. I don't know what was going on there. It makes sense that people might try to live in these old places, but the way they were acting was just too weird, and I felt like I was in danger the whole time. I never went back, and I don't tell this story to many people, but I thought it would work well for you. Number 4. The Witch's House. There's a house in my neighborhood that has changed either tenants or residents 5 times since I moved there, and technically if I count the original owner or owners. Realistically, it's probably because it's an expensive rental property, but being a horror writer and very imaginative, I entertain the idea of a paranormal reason, such as a murder or sudden death of the original or previous occupants, resulting in it being haunted. Something about the empty house, but I was never tempted to do something stupid like urbexing or paranormal investigations. Just to avoid trespassing charges. If I were to film a horror movie or do a fan-made installments of, let's say, the Halloween or Elm Street, I'd use it for the Myers house or Freddy's house, and it did inspire a short story of mine or 2. One of the previous owners apparently moved close to autumn, judging by the Halloween decorations left behind. One was a plastic black cat and a jack-o'-lantern that lights up when you plug it in, and the other a ceramic jack-o'-lantern placed in a flower pot off to the side of the porch. I became aware of these walking my dog in late winter and early spring, March to be exact. I noticed the plastic black cat blowing around and found it odd being March, nowhere near October. I walked over to it and placed it back on the porch, then proceeded to ring the doorbell and return the decoration to its owners, not knowing that the house was vacant, since I didn't know these neighbors too well, or any neighbor that lived there for that matter. This prompted me to nickname it the Halloween house when referring to it among friends in high school. I played the idea of finders keepers if the owners never returned for their property, but they eventually did. Fast forward to a year later, I was walking my dog again at night, and she smelled a fellow dog's business on the lawn, and proceeds to pull me up the driveway. Right then, I hear the shrill witch-like cackle come from within the house, and bolt from the lawn, sprinting with a tight tug on my dog's leash, not looking back. Being March, there were no Halloween CDs that would produce the sound effect of a witch. I consider this experience closer to paranormal, like a few others, but as I like to debunk and think logically, just in case it wasn't paranormal, there were only 3 explanations I thought of, and none made sense. I live by a highway and busy roads, so a truck horn, etc. could be one. Second is the neighbor had the TV on, which happened to be playing a horror movie or was watching a DVD, but never heard a TV to be that loud before. And third, being by a wooded area, it was an animal cry. Regardless, I wrote a short story about this experience called The Witch's House, which I've referred to it ever since. The thing is, I live in Ohio. No animal would sound like that, and coyotes do not have this shrill for a howl, and frankly it sounded too much like a laugh, and much more human or paranormal, and still gives me shivers thinking about it. On a side note, the house has very nice people living there now, so it no longer has this creepy vibe. Did they break the curse? Or did the landlord just give up on renting the house and sell it to them? I don't know. You decide. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I want to thank everybody who came to my live stream, and I'll plan on doing another one coming up this weekend. I'll let you know when. But as usual, like the video, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and hit the bell so you'll be notified of new videos. Leave me a comment and share the video. And if you have an original story, my email's in the description. Or you could also post it on the Killer Orange Cat subreddit. With that, I'll say this. Don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.